Hello, welcome to Vivatech. We are on the Manpower Group booth for this session 2026 of Vivatech, the 10th year of existence of Vivatech. I'm joined today by Greg from Hubert AI. Greg, first start to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sébastien. Absolute pleasure to be a guest of Manpower again. This is my third year at Vivatech Paris as a guest of Manpower. So yes, I'm Greg Dunbar. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Hubert AI. Hubert is an AI screening agent helping recruiters and Manpower recruiters to find the fastest path to the best talent. And we're a very proud partner of Manpower Group worldwide.
Great, and I just realized that I didn't introduce myself. So I'm the Global Brand Leader of Manpower. We are working together. And today we are at Vivatech also hearing a lot about AI, about the investments, but also about the return and adoption. And maybe let's start about that. What is slowing adoption, as I'm hearing in a lot of sessions today in Vivatech?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think there's been a lot of stop-start at enterprise level with AI, a lot of excitement. That excitement has been around for a while now, but I think there's also a lot of uncertainty. And I think that also depends on where you're applying the AI to and what you're using the AI for. So I think there's certain areas where AI is clearly, relatively low risk and the regulators are not too concerned and you're sort of free to experiment. But I think when it comes to what we do and what Manpower does, when it comes to recruitment and particularly things that can impact fundamental human rights and people's careers, people's livelihoods, I think that's where the regulators are really, really most interested, rightly. And that's where I think it's causing a lot of nervousness and anxiety for enterprises. So, and I think that's quite right. So, the regulators are, like the EU and the UK, are classifying recruitment technology as high risk, and I think that's right. But I think that's what's causing enterprises pause for thought, is how do we get the promised benefit of AI without that sort of perceived risk?
Yeah, I love it. And I love it when you say, where do you see the biggest benefits? And maybe the question then, where do you see that enterprise see the highest benefits and returns today as we speak?
Yeah, and it's ironic that the sort of the bigger returns come from the areas that are perhaps the more risky, or at least potentially the more risky. So I think, look, the first wave of AI has been used predominantly to do a lot of automation. So clearly, the low-hanging fruit is applying this technology to high-volume, repetitive tasks, and that fits really well with high-volume hiring and particularly high-volume screening, which is kind of where Hubert sits. The good news is we are seeing some very, very big returns and some early wins. I think that's not true necessarily of every kind of area of AI deployment within enterprise, but I think this is presenting a really, really great opportunity. And let me qualify that, because I think that's come from the fact that we've seen a once-in-a-generation structural change in the way that candidates behave. So this industry, we're not disrupting, we're not changing an industry that's in status quo. We're actually trying to solve novel problems that are being caused by the technology and how candidates are using that, right? So I think there's an emerging and quite urgent need to do something different. And the technology is lending itself very well to that. But the key, as I said, is how do you do that and stay compliant, both legally and ethically?
But when you speak about compliance, it's also a lot about, of course, governance. How do you balance just this governance, but also still the need to be very innovative, which also implies sometimes be fast? So
that's a great question, and it is a real challenge. But having said that, this is very core to how Hubert actually differentiates. The world that we sit in is the world where actually to solve the problem of sort of high volume hiring, where we need to score, we need to assess, we need to qualify candidates, right? And that needs to be done very carefully and very, very sensitively. And there are a lot of technologies that have rushed in to do that, and I think have become over dependent on effectively building methodologies around large language models to deliver those kind of outcomes. And that's very, very problematic, because you end up with a situation where it's effectively a black box. What's sitting at the center of your assessment is powered by a black box. So it's not necessarily repeatable. We're seeing evidence the large language models are still not accurate enough. They're inconsistent. And that is a problem when it comes to governance. So in order to have good governance, if you're measuring and scoring and ranking human beings, you have to have a deterministic approach to how you are doing that. And that is how we differentiate. So if you can be deterministic, and by that I mean have glass box approach to how you're measuring people and ensure that every time you are assessing a candidate, you're getting the same output, so it's consistent. If you can architect your solution to do that, then the governance takes care of itself. Your governance and your regulatory compliance comes as part of how you've architected the platform. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I want maybe to pivot to another aspect that I was hearing this morning about AI, and it's about AI sovereignty. How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge topic, right? So I think when people think about AI sovereignty, you're talking about the EU having AI sovereignty to be able to compete with the US and China. I don't think that's in our realm. That's somewhat out of our jurisdiction. But I think most people, when they think about sovereignty, they're thinking about where does the compute live? You know, where do the foundational large language models sit? I think at an enterprise level, it goes beyond that. It's not just about the compute. That is important, but it's about data sovereignty and it is about decision sovereignty. By data sovereignty, it's things as simple as data residency. Where does my data sit? But also, who are you sharing that data with? Who owns the data? Because we hear a lot, customers saying, well, we own the data. Well, actually, in the EU, the candidate owns the data. We have a candidate pledge, by the way, at Hubert. So, one of those pillars in our candidate pledge is that the candidate's data will always be sacrosanct and will always belong to them. So who owns the data? Where does that sit? But also, who is that being shared with? When it comes to very sensitive things like PII, personal identifiable data, and answers to, skills, their career history, or answers to interview questions, it's very sensitive, very, very sensitive data. And so for us, it's about making sure that we're very, very careful. So again, Hubert, we're not sharing that data with large language models. We've built a lot of our own proprietary deterministic assessment models. And a big benefit of that is that we can guarantee data sovereignty. And the same is true of decision sovereignty as well. With our deterministic proprietary models, we are able to explain every decision. We're able to reproduce every decision. So we're able to explain how the decision was made. We're able to demonstrate that it's fair from one candidate to another. And if one candidate were to take the same interview 10 times, they will get the same score. Okay, and that decision sits within Hubert and it sits with our customer, and it's transparent, it's explainable, and it's auditable. And that is really, really critical. So for me, that's the decision sovereignty. It's being explainable, it's being transparent, and fundamentally auditable.
So thank you, Greg. It was very nice to hear you. We spoke a lot about compliance, about governance, about sovereignty. I would say thank you again for the discussion and enjoy Vivatech.
Sébastien, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you to you and your team for hosting us here at Vivatech.